welcome to today's episode of Authentic Achievements, where I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by the fabulous Professor Shivani Sharma. Hello and welcome.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to this. When we met just last month, we got on so famously that I know that this is going to be such a great conversation. But before we get into it, let me introduce you a little bit more formally to our audience. So Professor Shivani Sharma is Deputy Dean of People, Culture and Inclusion in Aston University's College of Business School and Social Sciences. She's a psychologist by background and listed as one of 50 leading lights in the UK Exemplifying Kindness by the Women of the Future programme in association with KPMG. And that really is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? So could you tell us a little bit more about your journey so far?
Right, well, I think probably, thank you for that question. It's probably easier to start right at the beginning. As a 16, 17-year-old, I was quite motivated, mostly by having watched ER throughout my teen years, to pursue medicine. But a family member of mine who is always hates me going on podcasts, I should say, because I always tell this story. My brother-in-law is a GP and was helping with my chemistry homework, and I got my first ever 0 out of 10 and then decided I should probably pursue something else. And much to my parents' dismay, I decided to go into psychology, both for A-level study and then at university. I suppose I sort of had a plan thereafter what I would do in terms of an MSc traditionally, and then work as a chartered psychologist through further training. But I just took up an opportunity that came up to do a PhD, which I often admit that I didn't know what that entailed or what it would mean for me at the time. But I went with the advice I was given. And during the final year of my PhD, I was actually appointed at the university where I was studying, managing a project around the university, and that quickly acted to propel me into management as well in this context. And I've since maintained that trajectory of always being in a sort of academic management post and doing research on health inequalities alongside. I spent quite a long time at the university where I was originally based, and I've only recently moved to Aston, actually leading up to the podcast today, realise I'm almost at the 6-month mark.
Wow.
And alongside that, I think community and connection is really important to me. So I've always tried to maintain some sort of trustee, board level or voluntary roles alongside. So yeah, always had academic management and research going alongside, really.
Amazing. And I love that, like, you've kind of been given opportunities, but you've had the courage to take them, because I think sometimes that can be one of the challenges, can't it? We kind of are given an opportunity and then we spend too much time in our head coming up with all the reasons why we're not ready to be doing that yet. Is that something that is common for all of us? Is that something your studies have shown that is a challenge for us?
You mean in terms of not having the bravery, I suppose, to step outside of comfort zone? Yeah, I mean, I think we see it all the time, don't we? I mean, when I first had an academic management role, somebody I knew in the charity sector told me, the kinds of things that you need to get used to that are constants in life. Their words at the time were taxes, death, and organisational change. So we know, I think that's a famous saying that comes from somewhere where I don't know where to attribute it to, but that's always stuck with me, that actually a lot of what I do is around, in response to challenges within organisations or those that are external, and how that impacts change programmes within, whether it's the university sector or other charitable work that I've been involved in. It's always at the heart of it, usually a people project, because we all vary in how much and how well we adapt to change. And change means different things to different people, depending on its scale as well. Something that may seem trivial to me is actually quite important and a big deal to others. But what that's encouraged me to do is, because actually a big part of my PhD was looking at habits and habit formation, is to always have right centre to any project I start is, what is the impact of this going to be on others, and have we thought through all those bases? And I myself, I think, like everybody else, there is change that I'm comfortable with and change that I'm not, but I think I've always just accepted it's an inevitable of the kinds of roles that I'm involved in leading and also impacted by directly. So I try to have the approach of roll with it, see where it takes you. And that's, I suppose, true to my internal style, which my husband finds quite odd because I'm generally very risk averse. I'm that person that's not, ever going to take risks in that way. But when it comes to change and just flowing with things, I generally tend to cope with that quite well.
Yeah, I love that, because I think change is, I always used to say when I was running big teams, change is the only constant. And once you realize it is constantly changing, then actually you can start to become a little bit more comfortable with it. But what I love is the fact that you brought out that almost all projects end up being people projects, because people will be involved in them at some point. And at the minute you put people into it, it has a new dynamic, doesn't it? Because we're very different and often messy and confused, got other challenges that are going on. And it's the part that sometimes we forget to plan for, which is actually, how are the people going to handle this? What impact is it going to have on them? And I think the fact that you are planning that at the start must make the change itself easier, because you already anticipated that that's a dynamic that needs to be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that you've just made me think about, which is really important, is that we forget, like you say, people are people, they have lives aren't always uncomplicated or always straightforward, and you can't leave that at the door despite your best efforts. I can often remember in my previous role, because I was much more involved in directly line managing and appraising colleagues, sometimes when I heard about things that were going on in their, everyday life, I was really taken back that, wow, you still come to work and you're, getting on with, because it's not always a positive issue that they might be managing. So that's always, I think, that we have to remember that people don't just leave some part of themselves at the door when they come in. And therefore, when you're managing change programs, you have to be really sensitive, or any kind of change, to that is going to land on different people differently because of what's going on for them in and outside of the workplace as well. So that is something that I try to retain, but it's not always easy. So you mentioned earlier around the kindness and leading light. So people often ask me in response to that, like, is it just something that you do intuitively? But actually, I think kindness takes time to train, and just how we have development programs that focus on different skills. I think organizations and people themselves that value this as an attribute and want to be known for this to be, part and parcel of their everyday organizational values and culture, you have to make an effort to then action that, because when you've got, fast-paced changes, things that are external to your environment that you're managing, competition in most business environments now, in crowded markets, all of that pressure, when you're trying to navigate through that, sometimes it is difficult to maintain your kindness, especially if you've got something going on at home as well. So how we behaviorally train that, how it shows up for people in the workplace, I think is something we need to focus on, so that when we are initiating any change or just going about our day-to-day operation, whatever your role is in an organization, that we bring that value with us, because it's really easy to forget. It's not automatic, though we all intuitively, naturally, as humans, respond well to kindness.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's one of those soft skills, and it always makes me smile whenever we say about soft skills, because if they really were so soft, why do people find them so hard? It's the things they dismiss but they can't do for themselves. But I think you're right, kindness is one that we have to, it takes focus, and often what I've found over the years is when you've got people who are really kind, they might be really kind to everybody else, but they're not often very kind to themselves. And I know I definitely fell in that camp quite a lot, and learning to be kind to myself as well as kind to others took real effort, and it's still something I have to really focus in on, because you can get a little bit lost in there, can't you, trying to do what everybody else wants you to do and forgetting that you have to do some things for yourself as well. Absolutely. It all just goes nowhere, doesn't it? So, and that kind of brought me to a question about self-kindness and why self-kindness matters for career success, which I know is something we chatted about before, but I'd love to explore a little bit in more detail.
Yeah, where to start on that one? Self-kindness. So it's something that I'm continually learning more about. And I think partly my background in having done an undergraduate degree in psychology sort of forces you quite early on to think about what self-kindness means. But I actually outside of work do Indian classical dance. I'm training in Indian classical dance, and my teacher always says to me in Indian that you need to be greedy, and she means that in a context of greedy for knowledge, thirst for learning. And I find that greediness fits into all aspects of my life. So I want to, have a family. I want to show up and be there for my kids in the best possible way. At work, I'm hungry for myself, the organisation, as well as the people that I work with and their development. And then I want to pursue research as well. So all the negative side of that can be that there's always a continual pressure that you're putting on yourself. And I think especially nowadays where people are trying to look for occupations much more so than previously, where they definitely find a sense of purpose, and lots of people making decisions about what they want to work on based on social justice or alike. It can be hard to find that balance when your purpose is also so intertwined with your work. So I've started to actually make sure that I schedule time for reflection, which I know is absolutely important for your everyday practice, but also just times where I'm absolutely not engaged with looking at my phone or doing anything that is work related, no matter how much passion and dedication I have towards that. So I think that is some of the ways. But also just scaling down. It's not that I'm not ambitious, but I've learned over time that you need to have targets that are stretched for yourself, but still, you're not going to constantly be sitting there beating yourself up over why I didn't. So if I give you a practical example, I've always been in leadership positions since the beginning of my career, whereas lots of my, people who did their PhD with me and went into other universities that maybe not had that trajectory. And when we'd meet up socially, it'd be like, oh, I've published X number of papers this year and I'm doing X. And I'd always sit there thinking, oh, I haven't even done one yet or two. But it took me time to realize it's okay because I don't have the same demands and challenges and workload on an everyday basis. So if I scale back my expectation of myself, that really did help me. So I think when I'm setting objectives, I try to be really kind to myself from the beginning, that what's realistic and a bit stretched generally to get that balance of the two things, but also making sure, because purpose is such a big part of my everyday work, that I do make time to actually switch off from it and come back a bit refreshed.
I love that because it's so important, isn't it? Because when we take that moment to refresh ourselves, we come back with fresh eyes. So actually, I always find I'm probably significantly more productive when I come back than I was if I just sat there, went, no, just keep going. But it took me a long time to realise that. It took me a long time to realise that actually taking that half an hour or so and switching off and going, right, I'm just not going to think about those things. I'm going to think about something else. I had it used to be a long-standing joke with an organisation that I worked in that they loved when things went wrong, because I love cooking. And when everything went wrong, the best way I could find to deal with it was I'd go and cook something, and it always used to be a French lemon tart because you have to just stand and stir it for half an hour. You can't do anything else, otherwise it's ruined. So I'd go in the next day with these lemon tarts. Like, can we just destroy something else? So she bakes again. And I was like, no, don't. But I found that half an hour of just having to focus on something different and something that I enjoyed doing really helped me to process inadvertently when I next came back and sat down. It's funny how your subconscious brain seems to still be answering the problem for you, doesn't it?
And in the process, I love the example you gave being around food, because I find at work, I often do a lot of baking with my kids on the weekend, or when you're making, I eat a lot of Indian food. So when you're making Indian food, like usually you would make quite a lot anyway. So I'll often, ask my work colleagues on Teams, is anyone around tomorrow? Do you fancy some, dal, lentils for lunch? And they're like, oh, but it does create that moment of connection. So something that's enjoyable for me and giving me downtime, actually, I find that I can bring into the workplace that's creating moments of connection. And in some ways can be really kind, not just the act of sharing, but I think post-pandemic particularly, people are still feeling quite isolated, lonely, and you never know what gesture you made in the workplace that's actually really had a profound impact on someone else who perhaps spends the evenings alone, or is any other issue that they're experiencing where that connection made a bigger difference for them in that moment.
It's so true, because we don't know what's going on in other people's lives, do we? And sometimes the simplest little thing can mean the most to somebody else because it meant you thought about them. And I think I do the same as you. I spend a lot of time cooking with Scarlett at the weekends and things, and it's about time. Kids love it because you're giving them their time, plus you're learning something, plus they get something nice to eat at the end of it. But then when you give that to somebody else, you are also giving them your time, because it took your time to do that, and time's so precious, isn't it? I think it is one of those. I think it's the gift that keeps on giving, because it gives to the person you're giving it to, and it also gives to you as the person giving it, doesn't it?
I'm definitely learning when I'm cooking with my children, because they've got this obsession with, let's make videos and you can put it for us on your Instagram, mummy, or so I'm having to learn the technical skills to do that. But also it's contagious, right? Kindness in the workplace. And in any way, there is research evidence that shows that people who receive acts of kindness are more likely to perpetuate them. And coming back to this food example, you can tell I'm a big foodie. When I started in my new workplace, I remember saying, oh, so-and-so's going on holiday. What are they going to bring back with them? And they were very much like, we don't do that here. But when I came in and was constantly bringing food, now if someone goes away, they bring back Turkish delight or they bring back chocolate. So it's something that I innocently started off, but is continuing as a nice workplace cultural habit.
I love that, because it is about that community, isn't it? Community is so important, that sense of belonging. And I think when we moved into the pandemic and we all became less connected, we saw the impact of that loss of community and that loss of connection, and people just craved it, didn't they? And I think now having that as a key skill as leaders is so vital in the for our success in the future, which is how do we create not only the right culture but the right community for our teams, for them to be able to not just survive but thrive, and really have that safe place to kind of grow and develop and just check in and make sure that we're okay. Because we lost, I used to call it the virtual water cooler moments. When you're in an office with somebody, there will be a moment where you don't talk business. You'll ask them about what they watched last night, or tell them their dress, whatever it is. But you won't get into a lift with somebody and say nothing if you knew them. But when we're not connected in the same way, you've got to actually make effort to put that back in, haven't you?
You do, but I suppose there are ways to keep it going. So I was always really keen because, during the pandemic, particularly, I was managing quite a large area that we have online coffees and we do things. And I find now, even if I'm working from home, but a colleague is in or vice versa, I'll say, oh, do you want to have catch-up coffee? It's not ever the same as being in. But I also think that it's so much more important to focus on these things because, with cost of living crisis and other things, all businesses have got so many demands and challenges on them. It can be really easy to focus on the end output. And it's kind of a given that people are part of organizations. And we all say people make organizations, and their commitment, their engagement is what, delivers the outcomes. But I often find that the majority of the time I'll be putting my hand and say, can we remember the people in whatever role that I have been in? Because it's easy to be so outcome and task focused that we can forget that, as you said, all the softer stuff and all taking people on a journey. I genuinely think that any change program or anything you're trying to do almost needs a people plan alongside it, so that you have that lens throughout, which is great for me because that's exactly the kind of role that has been, promoted at the university. It's a new role that I'm in. I'm the only one that has it at the moment as part of an executive. But I think that's because I'm very fortunate to be working with a senior leader who has also championed that throughout their career. So that's what
skill. And when they see it for them, when they see it for themselves. I remember I was a client a couple of years ago, and the CEO sat there and went, "It's right for you because you do the fluffy people stuff, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do the fluffy people stuff." And that fluffy people stuff has just put £600,000 on your bottom line in the last 3 months using your statistics. Would you like me to share with you what they are? And he looked a bit taken aback and went, "That your absence was here, it's now here, and your retention was here." And I said, just on those three, I said, that's before we take into account the fact that they were here and you've got retained knowledge. I could possibly claim some of the uplift in revenue, but I'll let you decide. And he went, "You're not that fluffy."
I love that. I can imagine you saying that too, having only met you twice.
And he was like, "You're not that fluffy, are you?" And I was like, "No, not really." I said, "But I've always known if I get it right with the people will get it right for the customers, and then the company will get what it needs. But we have to get it right for the people. If we deliver a really bad service to them as a leader, we can't expect them to deliver a really good service to the customer because we're not demonstrating that. We're not demonstrating what we want them to do." I said, so surely that's where our focus should be. And yet you're so right. So often that's the bit that's missed. We spend so much time, resource and money on building business plans. And if we're really good, we might spend as much on looking at market research and the customer plan. And who does the people plan? So what skills do they need? What learning do they have to have for them to be able to do what we expect them to do in 5 years? Because if they could do it today, we'd be doing it today. So we need to plan that, and it just never seems to align, does it?
But I think what you've reminded me is that I often get from journalists questions around equality roles or people type roles, and are they woke? Should they, should you have them? And my argument always is actually I think organisations try to address it through we just need someone at level X who does people or alike. But actually it's a really difficult and high level skill that does need to be invested in, because if it goes wrong, it can have a catastrophic impact on the organisation. And often where people think, "Oh, we invested this money and it hasn't paid off," I would argue it's because, so often I will get people from sectors like the NHS, for example, who want some advice on, how have you led equality agendas? And I'll say, well, have you looked at the governance and building it into all of your governance first? Because somebody has to be overseeing this, accountable for it. And they'll say, my brief is to arrange International Women's Day or, Black History Month or South Asian Heritage Month. I'm not allowed to go near the governance. So how can you expect that person to deliver outside of a particular remit of, community and having more awareness for equality? How can they push the different types of KPIs on this if you're not giving them that level, that clout for which they can bring about truly meaningful, inclusive cultures?
Yeah.
I think we need to invest more and more in this and I do think that the next generation of people are more interested when they're recruiting. It's more powerful they want to know what kind of organisation they're going in. How do you value people? How does it feel to work here? Rather than, what package are you offering me, etc. That's been my experience. I'm sure that's perhaps not true in every setting, but certainly I see more of it, that it's about what's the culture, community like, ethos, as opposed to the outputs.
It's true. And it's in fact, there was a World Economic Forum report. It was done in 2018, but it was about what to expect from leaders in 2023 and beyond. And that showed that in the top 10 things that people were looking for from their leaders included social impact and social influence. So it's like really shifting into that. We're much more focused on purpose and value and mission. And we want to work with people that align with what's important to us. And I think that's why we do need to invest more in it, because the old traditional style of management and leadership doesn't align to that unless we add in additional skills, does it, to be able to really bring that into its full focus.
And I think that authenticity that you talk about is really important, because we can all see examples on social media. We're so connected nowadays of leadership that looks perfect. And, the people doing the leadership are also, putting out a really positive image of it. but actually parts of it are really hard, and it can get nasty even at times. So certainly I've been trying to use the ways in which I have to connect to people to be a bit more transparent about the ins and outs of every day and what that can feel like.
Yeah, it is. I mean, life is complicated and gets messy. I remember doing, unfortunately, having to do a big redundancy program. And I remember the day before sitting with the board, and they said, "Are we ready?" And I said, "Well, ready as we're ever going to be." And they all looked horrified and were like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, tomorrow we're going to tell 1,800 people that their job is at risk. I have no idea what that piece of information, when added to whatever they're already carrying individually, is going to do. I can't ever know that. I can't never know what's going on." I said, "So all I can do is hold the space for them to be angry, to be upset, to be hurt, to whatever emotion they're going to go through. I've just got to be able to sit and hold that space and let them go through that with as much kindness and empathy as we possibly can." So, but you've got to understand that for me, one of the biggest skills I learned was getting comfortable with uncomfortable as a leader, because you will get uncomfortable very often. People will tell you things that are awful or devastating or sad, and you've got to help them through that, which you can only do if you really listen to them. And I think listening is a real act of kindness, isn't it? Listening to understand what's going on in their world, and not necessarily having to solve it for them, but helping them to find a way to solve it for themselves. Is that something that, again, you see a lot of in all the stuff you're doing?
Yeah, I think the line that you just used about being comfortable, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, in a previous, when I've been asked to comment on things that I've learned in my journey, that's definitely one that I'd say you can't come into leadership if you just expect it's always going to be rosy or a particular way. You have to be comfortable in constantly dealing with uncertainty, etc. But within that, sometimes you're going to find yourself needing to be the calm for other people. And I think that's where all this self-kindness, etc., really starts to matter, because the kinds of leaders that I've been drawn to myself and try to learn from have been those who, regardless of what is going on, their emotion is not just going up and down. They have been able to channel that in a more productive way, and they recognize that it's going to be more distressing, but I've got a different influence of a sphere of influence to those that I'm supporting. So there's no good in me being really emotive about this, which is not to say emotion shouldn't show up in the workplace, but I think that part of our role, and certainly something that I try to practice, is no matter what stress is coming down on me from any sphere of my life, how can I try to be the more calming amongst all the change that anyone might be dealing with at any time?
I think that's so true. As a leader, that ability to kind of regulate the emotion to an extent, like you say, it's not saying don't bring it in, but it's kind of buffering it a little bit, I guess, like we do when you don't want to add fuel to the fire, do you? You don't want it to be like, okay, that's just gonna make matters worse. And actually, if we can provide some calm, if we can look for the areas where actually we can help people see an alternate viewpoint, but not in a way that makes them feel like they're under attack. It's those leaders that provide that calmness, that says, yeah, you do see a bit of emotion, but it's here, versus the ones where you're like, whoa, what day we're going to have today is going to depend on what they look like when they walk through the door. I mean, they're just not nice places to work.
That's exactly it. You don't want to fit. I mean, we'll all probably have experienced situations in leadership where you perhaps agree with something you're having to do or not, and you recognize that you have to do it. But there's no point in you emphasizing your frustration to everybody as well. You have to be genuine, but I think that just means being much more mindful about how you're communicating and what you're communicating on a day-to-day. So that you always retain that people are looking to you in that leadership position to be able to provide advice, support, guidance. So I absolutely recognise I don't always have the solutions. I'm not always perhaps in agreement with something that I might be working on or helping boards, etc. through. but there's a way to interact with people. There's a way to do that kindly. I think, but it is, as I said earlier, a skill to practice. It's not that it just comes, and I don't always probably get it right myself, but it's something that I'm mindful of, that when I leave an organisation or I've left a project or something, what would people think of me? I'm a real legacy person, and I like to think that they'll say things that I contributed and added value to, rather than, she was all over the place with her leadership style, take aggression out on colleagues, or like, that's not what's true to how I like to be treated and how I want to treat others in my approach.
And I'm sure that is not how we come across at all, because when we go in intentionally thinking about what is our legacy going to be, what do we want people, to think, and I think we're quite similar on this. I always go into everything and think, I want people to think I added some value, whatever that was, but that I added some value. I was at least helpful, because that's how I try and be. It's how I try and live my life. So that's kind of those bits. But I think for me, what's come across through the whole conversation is it's about being intentional. It's about thinking things through and making a conscious choice. And then when reflecting, spotting that maybe that choice might not have been the best choice, making a new one. But giving yourself the self-care to not beat yourself up for the next 6 weeks about the fact you made a bad decision, because actually you've repaired it by making a better one. I could literally chat to you all day, but I'm really conscious.
I think what you said is really important, that because it was very much about the not being on autopilot all the time, and just that consciousness, intention. And we knew that would happen when you work in an open space. Sorry about that. My colleague checking kindly if I would like anything to eat.
Oh, which is lovely. And that's the bit I love about this show, is it's called Authentic Achievements, because we are just authentically who we are. I mean, I'm quite lucky at the moment that the dog has actually stayed on my feet, but very often, he runs around, he sits on that chair and tries to take over.
Well, just give him, I passed my hand, so that's all right. But that's kind, But again, that's a great example. Senior leader, mindful, checking, just happened to see a member of their staff. Are you okay? Do you need anything?
Which I love, because that epitomizes what we've been talking about today. So if I could end asking you one thing, if you could go back and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would be and now I did this intuitively anyway, but now having reflected on it consciously, I would say to others, especially if you don't have a history in siblings or alike I was first generation through university and making it into a kind of this sort of professional environment, is don't let your mind and your thinking be the thing that constrains you. So be open and brave to what opportunities are before you and where they might take you. I think that's the advice I would give.
I love that. What great advice. Because I think it is, isn't it? Is that it's having the courage to just take the opportunity and recognize that whatever we believe is what we're going to achieve. So if we believe we can do it, we will. And if we believe we can't do it, we'll find a million ways to hold ourselves back. So if we can, I was telling my friends, look, boy, this is the day. So we win the game in here before we win it out here. So
I love that.
Play the right game. Play the one that's going to bring you joy instead of playing the one that's going to make you sad. Shivani, it's been an absolute joy. I am so looking forward to our next catch up, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and kindness with us.
Thank you for having me.